Hello. Well, I finally have some time, and I am also finally ready to make a couple of videos talking about my childhood and my young adulthood. Um, I've not been terribly looking forward to it. These are difficult times for me, but I'm going to try to give a brief overview of them at least, because ultimately there's just way too much to fit into even a couple of 10-minute long videos. So the first one will be my childhood, and the second one I think will be my young adulthood. Let's take a look at the time. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to try to be quick. Um, so, I'm not sure if this has any bearing, but I wanted to mention, I guess, that when I was about 6 months old, I was involved in a serious car accident um, where I was sitting on my mother's lap when somebody pulled in front of us and I was thrown through the windshield. Um, this accident nearly killed my mother. Um, my dad was almost unhurt because he had a seatbelt on. Needless to say, I was in traction for like 4 or 5 days and in a body cast for like 6 months after that. I mentioned that because I did remember reading somewhere that um, early traumas like that can have behavioral impacts for the rest of a person's life. And certainly, by the time that I was in kindergarten, I have reports from then saying that I was very shy and withdrawn, and that I didn't play with the other kids, and very timid, and so forth. And I do have vague memories of being um, very apprehensive, even in kindergarten. Um, I will say that there were a couple of kids in my neighborhood that were just a few houses away from me that were the exact same age as I was. And we were friends probably until like 7th or 8th grade. You know, we would ride our bikes around and play sports in the neighborhood and do things together and whatnot. For the most part at school, though, I definitely kept to myself. I didn't really have many friends. Occasionally I had a couple. At 5th grade, I do remember that I was sent to a private school, and I have a memory of thinking, that this was a good thing because it would give me a chance to, start over. Um, I don't have very good memories of the years before that, but I don't think that they were going all that well for me at the time. Um, so at fifth and sixth grade, interestingly enough, I was kind of the class clown. I mostly made fun of myself and also kind of made fun of the teachers, and I got in trouble a whole heck of a lot. And also during this time, I did actually hang out with a small group of boys, and we would all play Dungeons and Dragons, which was all the rage at the time. That lasted for a couple of years before the entire group kind of fizzled. And also by about 7th grade, um, I guess I want to back up and just say one thing also that, well, a couple of things. For one, I was also the smallest kid in the class for many years, all the way until high school. I was very small. Um, during this whole time up through high school and everything, I was always, the last kid to get picked. They would fight over, me and, the overweight kid that was, on the other side, was to, who had to have who. Um, Nobody wanted me on their sports teams. You know, I don't know. I didn't play sports with the other kids. They didn't want me. They didn't do stuff with me in the playgrounds. I do have memories of going and finding quiet spots in playgrounds and just kind of sitting and watching the other kids play. Um, I liked to play in the swings and stuff like that, and if I got out there early enough, I could do so. But once, the more dominant kids got out there, I was no longer, I no longer had access to those things, and I would just go find a quiet spot. Um, I wasn't picked on during this whole time. There's a couple occasions where somebody tried to pick on me, but my dad told me that if I'm bullied, that I just need to sock the guy, and he taught me how to punch. And I did this, a couple of times in my early grade school. I got teased. I went and I knocked the guy out. Well, I didn't knock him out, but I decked him pretty hard for, you know, being in first or second grade or whatever. And really nobody ever picked on me again after that. I think that people just kind of left me alone. Um, anyway, back to about 7th grade. So I was kind of the class clown at school. I got in trouble all the freaking time. But at about 7th grade, I think that I hit puberty and I changed completely. I went from being um, kind of loud and obnoxious, to being very, very quiet and very, very withdrawn. And I really stopped talking to people at all. Um, it was a complete turnaround in other people's eyes. Really internally it wasn't all that different. I felt pretty alone before. I felt isolated. I very much did not think that girls were interested in me, even though I was interested in them. The one girl that I was expressed some interest to, told me she wasn't interested, and the popular girls, of course, wanted nothing to do with me, and they're the ones who teased me a little bit. Actually, the boys wouldn't do it, but there were some girls that would. Um, so I felt like I wasn't likable by the girls. Um, Certainly, but anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So, um, and I'm just gonna let this video go because I don't have enough time to like make repeated copies. Um, and I need to kind of get this thing going. So anyway, I got real quiet when I hit puberty around 7th, maybe 8th grade. It was like I came in, one year, that year when I came into school, I was no longer the loudmouth. I just sat in a corner as far back as I possibly could, and, tried not to interact with people. Um, During the first year of high school, I was in swim team this whole entire time. I had always been in swim team. And during the first year of high school, I was on the JV team, and for a while, it seemed like things were going pretty well. I was kind of hanging out because we had to hang out for like an hour and a half before the varsity got done with their stuff, and so I hung out with all the JV people, and I wasn't quite interacting with them, but I was kind of becoming part of their group, and I sat with them during lunch and stuff. Um, but to cut to the chase here, there was a foreign exchange student from Sweden who was terribly popular and also kind of obnoxious. And one day, out of the clear blue sky, at lunchtime, he turned to me and said, "You stink." And then he got up and went to a different table, and everybody followed him. And from that day on, I always ate alone. Um, that was kind of a traumatic experience, and it reinforced, a lot of the little things that, I was experiencing. Um, and other little things I have to say, I felt like, I guess I should point out real quick, before I kind of wrap up this super brief tour of my childhood, that my dad was always very, very critical of me, and my mom mostly didn't pay attention to me, and when she did, it was to yell at me for something. And it seemed really, really spontaneous and not something that I could control. It was not reliable. One day I would be doing something that I would do every day, and then I would be yelled at for it. Um, and I could never do anything right for my dad. So I really had this feeling as I was growing up that, school sucked. The kids didn't like me at school. I didn't have friends. The teachers um, weren't very fond of me for the most part. Um, and home sucked. I had, my parents, I couldn't do anything right. It was like I had almost nowhere to go. And the one place that I would go is there was a woods kind of nearby my house with a creek in it, and I would go back there and hang out alone. And that was kind of, a respite. Um, I'm really running out of time here, I think. Anyway, for my junior and senior years in high school, my parents sent me to a military school because my grades had been slacking, and they thought that military school, what I needed was more discipline. That missed the mark totally, but that's what they thought, and they sent me to military school. At military school, I also had no friends. I remember sitting in my room, listening to depressing music with the lights off, every Saturday night, watching everybody go to the weekly dance, and just sitting there and watching people go and wishing that I could go too, but knowing that there was no way in the world I could do it. Um, when high school was over, I remember, and the graduation, everybody was all crying and stuff, and and I remember thinking, being sad and crying too, and thinking, wow, I missed it. I missed all of it. All these kids had all these experiences. They all grew up together. They had all this shared stuff and all these memories and things, and then I missed it all. Um, and I was sad about that. So I think this video is about the time is about up here. So I'm gonna close this up and move on to the next chapter.